welcome to the first day of PRCA's Festival of Culture in conjunction with Intent Health, a healthcare comms agency. So this week we are exploring culture. Yay! Well, I know you guys are on mute, so I'll know that you're cheering in the background. And with this, we've decided to, bring some culture in with Pecha Kucha. And with this, I, as Rebecca Sangster-Kelly, your host, am a comms and stakeholder management consultant, and with Studium Consulting, and I am joined by 4 guests who are going to be taking on this challenge of Pecha Kucha. For those of you who have not heard of Pecha Kucha, it is Japanese for chit chat, and each of our lovely 5 contestants will be challenged to present their thoughts, ideas in 20 seconds per slide of over 20 slides. So you guys, this is a good party game to go and do your friends and family or your colleagues in your next meeting. Bring some entertainment to it and watch them really pull out and be concise, informative, entertaining, and leave us with things to consider. So, and also just to highlight before we start, we do have a charity that you can donate to, Choose Love. So Tila has just put the link in the chat. So if you want to donate to this great cause, please check it out. And yeah, spread the. Okay, so as we start our chit chat, our first participant is Rebecca Zeitlin, and she is Head of Communications and External Affairs for Hybrid Air Vehicles Limited. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca. And yeah.
1 second while I get things sharing.
I'm just glad the sharing's working. So we're starting.
Yeah, can you give me a heads up if it has worked?
It is working. We can see your
Excellent.
slides. So,
Great.
And I will now go on mute. So again, if anyone's just joined, if you can go on mute and your video off if you're not speaking for this first Pecha Kucha session.
Excellent. Well, hello, and I'm glad I get to go first. It's always very exciting. I'm Rebecca. I'm the Head of Communications and External Affairs for Hybrid Air Vehicles Limited. For those of you who know me, this meandering around will be completely in character. For those who don't, well, bear with me. I promise there's a point. So culture is a big topic, and it's hard to know where to start. So when I don't know where to start, I always like to start at a definition or 2 definitions of the word culture. The first, arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. The second, the ideas, customs, and social behavior of a particular people or society. I think those 2 definitions will be familiar. But what about a 3rd definition, a verb definition? Culture is to maintain in conditions suitable for growth. Now, I've got a hard science background, so this definition is familiar to me, hence the Petri dishes, but it isn't what we think of when we think of culture, especially when us comms people talk about culture. Now let's look at the origins of the word culture. It's a Middle English word, and you can all look up the etymology yourselves, but it always goes back to growing, cultivating, and tending. Now, growing, cultivating, and tending are all things we do to organisms, to things we're trying to grow, hence the definition of to maintain in conditions suitable for growth. Culturing is, in effect, fostering the perfect environment that allows the organism to do what organisms do, grow. Now, does this feel like a diversion from organizational culture? It might, but it isn't. Like organisms, organizations also want to grow. Organism and organization even share some word roots. All right, I get it. It feels like a stretch, but it is central to how I think about organizational culture. The key here is that you can't force things, you can only foster them. You can't make an organism grow, but you can cultivate it. You can't create organizational culture, but you can cultivate it. So what this means for us is that we should consider what we do in the context of cultivation and recognize that cultivation takes effort, sometimes a lot of effort. Unlike building a house where you physically manifest your idea and it more or less appears as you expect, cultivation is a joint exercise. The organism has a part to play too, and it can behave in unexpected ways. So what are some of the lessons of cultivation? You first have to prepare your substrate, whether that's compost or agar, you need to have a base. And you need to seed intentionally. In the absence of seeds, unexpected things will always grow. Genuinely, always. You never see an empty plot for very long, right? Now, the work doesn't end at the beginning. This one is pretty obvious, but you'd be surprised how easy it is to take the set it and forget it approach. If you do set it and forget it, don't be surprised if what grows isn't what you had planned. Maintenance is important from the very beginning to create the right environment. Sometimes what you do won't work. Living things and organizations don't always respond how you would expect to your attempts to cultivate them. Sometimes they grow in odd shapes. This is why it's important to be conscious of the fact that you are not dictating, you're guiding, and you need to keep an eye on the outputs of your efforts. Speaking of outputs, let's talk about them. Using beef. Beef cattle are big business. You want to maximize the amount of cow you get for the feed you put in. So how do you know if your cultivation is working? Well, you measure it. First, you know exactly, and I really do mean exactly, how much you're putting in. It's quite the exercise to measure all of that. The second step is then to control your environment so you can get clean data. Now, in beef cattle, this means a stable specifically designed to capture all of their, outputs. And that's what happens, outputs. So step 3 is to know everything that comes out. And certainly in the case of cows, that's messy, but in communications, it can be messy too. So what do you do with all those outputs you've measured? You do the math. Now, I don't mean math literally here. I mean, you do the analysis that you need to determine what has happened in that organism you are cultivating. After you know what happened, you can start figuring out why by testing, and then you can go back and modify the inputs you're making. Now, purpose is important. Organisms also have purpose. Now, I'm not going to debate evolutionary theory, but let's go with this. Organisms' purpose is to facilitate the replication of their genes. When we cultivate, we usually are adding a purpose. We're asking the organism to do something beyond the baseline of what it would do on its own. So when we talk about organizational culture, why does purpose matter? Purpose is why we do things beyond the basic achievement of growth. Your organization's purpose helps you cultivate your organizational culture with specific intent. It helps you make choices about what to do next and why you're doing that. Now, I work in-house. I'm embedded within the organism, and it definitely is an organism. Organizational culture grows out of the people, the structures, a whole heap of other factors. And sometimes organizations get in their own way. We can influence by cultivating, but we can't simply build our cultures at will. Organizations want to grow. That's a natural feature, especially those organizations that are profit generating and trying to capture market share. So the selection of purpose provides a useful reason to be cultivating a corporate culture. Just having a random purpose statement is a bit of a waste. It should be an anchor point for everything in the organization, helping you aim beyond growth. All right, so that's been a bit of a strange journey. I bet you didn't think you'd be hearing about beef cattle from an aerospace person today, but I hope you can see the method in the madness. We started with organizations and organisms being similar. Unlike houses, organizational culture can't be built, but it can be cultivated. Cultivating things is hard. It requires diligence. Capability Brown earned his fame by cultivating a landscape into intently managed pastoral perfection, but it does not always go to plan. It's still worth it though. Cultivating allows us to foster the organizational culture we want to help us achieve our purpose best. So let's return to where we started, a definition of culture. If we consider organizational culture as a verb and focus on cultivating rather than building, we stand the best chance for successfully steering our organizations in the direction we want to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was great. I really liked where that went and how you summarized. And as now everyone knows, this is what to expect when you're in a Pecha Kucha session. So thank you for a class act to start with. And now we'll see how everyone else measures up. No, this is not a competition. However, if you have any questions, because we're hopefully with all these different views and approaches are to be shared today, do put your comments in the chat. I will be collecting them. We will have the question answer after. And yeah, we will see where our next guide takes us, which is Evita Patel. So Evita, if you want to pull up your slides. And Evita is the director of Comms Rebel and the co-founder of A Leader Like Me, which if you guys are on Twitter, you have seen a lot of her stuff. And yeah, I'm really interested to see where this is going. So over to you, Evita.
I mean, no pressure after Rebecca's session there, is there? Goodness me. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Please be kind. I've never done a Pecha Kucha slide thing before, but if you want to connect with me, then you can connect through that QR code there as well, because it'll be great to carry on this conversation. So the face of the workplace is changing. Gen Zs are now entering the workforce, the first digitally native generation. Millennials are now starting to step into C-suite positions and more senior decision-making roles. On top of all of this change, we've just experienced a global pandemic that's changed the way business operates. But before I delve into why inclusive culture is important to me, I want to define the term. Inclusive culture is a collection of values, expectations, and practices that guide and inform the action of all team members, but it also embraces and celebrates our differences in experiences, backgrounds, and the way we think. So why should businesses care about cultivating inclusive culture? We live in a diverse country. Almost 15% of the population is non-white, 51% are female, 10% of the population are disabled, and 10% are over 16s, don't identify as heterosexuals. We're very privileged to have this amongst us. With Gen Zs entering the workforce, cultivating a culture of inclusion is going to be critical. We need to understand how they can be nourished and nurtured. We need to understand how they can be the future success and be the talent pipeline that can help a business to continue to grow and perform. A recent study by Deloitte found that job loyalty for millennials was often tied to how it addresses D&I. And this is important to know because by 2030, the workplace will be dominated by 75% of millennials. 75%. Millennials and Gen Z's view of what an inclusive culture is very different from other generations. Other generations tended to look at target-led initiatives to ensure that there was different representation of characteristics such as races and genders and sexualities, but often forgot to think about inclusion. Gen Zs and millennials tend to look beyond the numbers and targets. They view inclusive cultures in a workplace as a safe and supportive environment that gives a voice regardless of perspective and regardless of role or their background. In their world, everybody deserves a voice and everyone deserves to be heard. However, traditionally, when we've looked at culture, we tend to look above that iceberg. We think about how many slides can we have in that office, the free fruit and ice cream, how we dress, table tennis tables, yoga. Some of these will, of course, impact culture, but do they help create a sustainable workplace environment? I don't think they do. Inclusive culture is much more than physical symbols, and the last 18 months have definitely demonstrated that. To build and to cultivate an inclusive culture, we need to look under that iceberg. Look at our differences, the purpose, the missions, and our values, and what do they mean? People often think that culture is a responsibility of our HR colleagues to fix and sort, but it's a role of every leader. It's the way the leader shows up, their reinforcement of ideas, value-driven behaviors. These are some of the things that can make or break a culture. And it's something that we need to think about. There's lots of research reports and evidence that demonstrates that if a business has a healthy, inclusive culture, then they can expect increased revenue, better staff engagement, fewer absences, better retention, and attraction of great talent. Inclusive cultures can also drive greater productivity and innovation. When colleagues have a sense of belonging, they know they're psychologically safe at work, they will continue to thrive. So what can we do as communicators and PR practitioners to help cultivate this inclusive culture that works across generations? After all, we're privileged to access and data. We're the storytellers, the advisors, and the gatekeepers of many of the channels. So the following, I'm now going to share with you some top tips and techniques that will help you contribute and cultivate an inclusive culture in your business. The first step is, before you do anything, you need to look at the data and insight and research. What is this telling you? You need to check in with your biases at this point as well, because it's really easy to make assumptions. Speak to a range of people from a diverse range of backgrounds. What are they saying to you? What are you hearing? What are your customers telling you? This is going to help you understand what belonging means to your colleagues in your organization. We all need a sense of connection to the organization or to groups of people that encourage us to be ourselves. Not only does this lead to better engagement, but can bring greater empowerment as well. Like I said before, HR are almost always the team that has to lead in culture. But to make a real difference, we need empathetic leaders. Leaders who are not afraid to show that little bit of vulnerability, to lead with an open heart and with mind. That transparency will be appreciated and returned. And most importantly, trust will be built. Having goals is important, and performative quotas won't be appreciated. Just because you have a diverse workforce, it doesn't mean it's an inclusive culture. What's your processes like? Who do you invite to speak? How do you create a two-way feedback so people can contribute to the conversation? Do you have fair representation in the stories that you're sharing about the organization? Often we're surrounded by folks who have similar backgrounds and insight and thinking as us, and we can exclude without even realizing. Look back at the last 10 stories. Did you have a range of voices sharing their thoughts and ideas? What channels are you using to communicate to your workforce? And how are you analyzing people appreciated and recognized and connected for the work that they do? Research by Forbes showed that 55% of millennials are not engaged at work. And I guarantee with what we've experienced in the last 18 months, this is going to change. Creating an inclusive culture is not an overnight task, and it can take time to see change take place. It's not a one-size-fits-all either. Do your due diligence and keep track of the data and insights so you can stay ahead of the curve. This effort will make a valuable difference to the people in your organization.
Thank you very much, Evita.
Thank you.
Great. And so we've gone from cultivating on the farm to using data to lead. So now I'm just wondering where everyone else is going with theirs. This is great. As for anyone who's just joined us, if you're not speaking, if you can make sure you guys are on mute or have your video off. And also, if you have any questions, I know we have one I've noticed, take a note of. Any questions during the session, just put them in the chat and we will come to them at the end. Our next brave soul is Rohan Shah, Managing Director and Co-founder of a recruitment agency, Reuben St. Clair. So, Rohan,
hey.
Go on, take the stage, share your slides.
Thank you. I mean, after Rebecca's and Advice, I'm wondering if there's anything left to say. I thought it was fantastic.
Well, we need some male views now because we've had two women, so we need diversity. Okay. And as we know, culture diversity is great. So your point of view is still valid.
Okay, let me just share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. Just going to
go. We can see it.
Okay, excellent. Let me just get it into presenter view. Okay, so look, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to obviously be invited to give my views on culture. As mentioned, I'm from Reuben St. Clair. We're a specialist recruitment consultancy to the PR and comms industry, and we're the exclusive talent partners also to the PRCA. As one of the founders, I work closely with a select number of clients advising and guiding on recruitment practice, ensuring a fair and just recruitment process. So what is culture and what does it mean to me? As recruitment is my profession, I'd like to talk about culture from a recruitment perspective. You know, from my nearly 20 years experience of recruiting for small and large businesses, from industries, from Tupperware to software, I've come to learn that the use of the word culture can be one of the most dangerous when it comes to the hiring process. The reason for this is purely because the word can be so misunderstood, or put another way, everyone has their own understanding of the word culture. Despite an organization, which let's not forget is one entity, saying it has a particular culture, generally it can differ from employee to employee. This then can create a disparity within the organization. To some, culture is customs of society for a particular group of people. To others, it might be the way that people think and the way that they behave. When it comes to recruitment, what becomes very clear sometimes when people talk about culture is that they tend to describe what they like, who they like, and what they want. Normally, it means like them. I don't need to go much now to say why this then becomes a dangerous word. I have often pondered whether the word culture should be eradicated entirely when it comes to hiring. So what does culture mean to me from a recruitment perspective? Well, certainly from my point of view, what should it look like? The purpose of culture, in my opinion, is to drive the business in one direction together, for everyone to feel that they're contributing in some way and for everyone to feel that they belong. With this at the forefront, the culture of a business to me is very clear. It's the values in which the business and ultimately the people are generally driven by. There absolutely should be entire uniformity across the business based on values, and this will mean that the business is then being propelled in one direction. I'm sorry for the picture, Google One Direction and you've got no other choice. What this doesn't mean is that you have to hire people who look the same, behave the same, think the same, or indeed are from the same cultural background. Values shape behaviors and behaviors shape outcomes. Let's take a business whose values are those that are seen in this picture: respect, ethics, honesty, and integrity. Interviewing against these values will truly determine whether a person will fit into the business, rather than fit being based on something like, do they speak and act like our clients? Or are they sociable enough to go for a drink after work? If all employees consistently meet a set of meaningful values, they will all belong in the same way. They will all have common ground in what drives their behavior, which ultimately will then continue to propel the business in the right direction. This means that the business employees can have entirely different social cultures and different ways of thinking, yet they can be working together in absolute unison because their actions will be shaped by the belief in the values that the business has adopted. But for me, culture doesn't stop at values. Within a business, the culture is also driven by processes and business practice. These are, of course, fundamentally aligned with the values, but these are changing pieces. A company's process and business practice with 10 staff may look wildly different when they come to have, say, 1,000 staff. I once read that if the values are the company's bedrock, then the culture is the shifting landscape on top of it. And for me, this is a really strong analogy, but I would argue that culture is the whole thing. It's the bedrock, the values, as well as the landscape, the business practice, the processes, etc. It's just that one is more deep-rooted and unlikely to change that much. Very much like a shifting landscape, we must accept that parts of our culture will change over time or from time to time, and that's okay. But we must aim to keep the foundations on which the culture is built, our values, much the same. Otherwise, cracks will start to become visible in the culture of the organization. When working with clients, particularly on enhancing their employer brand, we normally start by asking employees to describe the culture of the business that they work in. If we're getting different answers, then the likelihood is each employee is taking the parts that they like and relaying that as the business culture. It can be a bit finger in the air sort of stuff. So, furthermore, if we don't hear the values being incorporated in their answers, then we always suggest to the client that it may be a good time now to revisit or to reinforce their business values. We then work with the client to ensure that everything from their promotions to their client work to their hiring encompasses those values. When candidates are looking for a new company to join, our advice is, when it comes certainly to preparation of interview, is that by exploring a company's values, it will tell them an awful lot. If the hiring manager struggles to articulate them, it's unlikely that the business culture has been living upon the values, and maybe this manager might be looking for someone like them. Similarly, we tell the candidate to thoroughly explore the company's processes and business practice. This will tell them much about the stage that the business is at, and whether the company has the right infrastructure, the tools, and the right management to create the right environment for this candidate to go on and succeed. Whilst I've often pondered, I've also often concluded that when it comes to hiring, we shouldn't have to eradicate or cancel the word culture. Culture should epitomize the greatness of a business, and it should always be the deciding factor in a place someone chooses to work. Culture shouldn't be a dangerous word when it comes to hiring. What culture means to me from a recruitment perspective, I appreciate may not mean the same to others. Why? I can't say. Maybe it's just a difference of opinion. But what I do know is now, more than ever, it's important to get your business culture absolutely right. And that simply means ensuring it is entirely understood. The only thing left for me to say is thank you so much for listening to me harp on about what culture means to me. I, of course, would love to hear your views on what I've said today, and of course, what culture means to you. So here are my contact details. Feel free to contact me. And once again, thank you so much for having me today.
Great, thank you, Rohan. And that was from a recruitment perspective, fantastic. So yes, it is always interesting when you have a presentation like this and bringing all these different people from different sides and different places together. And I agree, culture means a lot different to a lot of people, which we are seeing with these first three and two more people to present. All right, so we have some more questions in the chat, which is great. And just to highlight that there is a charity that we're backing today. So Choose Love, there is a link in the chat. It may need to be repasted again, I think, for some people who have joined a bit after it was already shared. So if you want to take a look at the Just Giving link and give to Choose Love. And now, as we continue on our Pecha Kucha journey, we have been to the farm. We have had some call to action from Evita with data. And now, when we have Rohan from Recruitment, and now we have Adrian Talbot. And Adrian is the global CFO for Hotwire Communications, and he's here today. So, Adrian, please share your screen.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is that coming up properly?
Yes, I see it. You are good to go.
Excellent. Well, thank you for inviting me. Delighted to be here, and don't know how I'm going to follow those excellent presentations, but I will do my best. High music added to Hotwire's culture, the story of the borderless thinkers, and I am Adrian Talbot. Let's go. I've worked in 3 remarkable cultures. I've worked in at least 3 average ones, and I've worked in 1 poisonous one. The collection of that experience means I have a viewpoint on culture, which I'm going to try and share with you today in terms of what it means to me and what it means to Hotwire, and it does actually build on what some people have said so far. 20 years as a CFO in global media agencies, CFO at Hotwire since 2016. 65% of costs in our businesses are people. So that's a really important thing. And creative businesses tend to create remarkable, unique cultures. Look at TV production. Even 10 years ago, there was a dog in every meeting. Hotwire, we're on 325 people. The most important point, bottom right, we are one of the PR Week best places to work globally, and we shot up to number 4 in the Sunday Times from number 40 last year in terms of best places to work. And it's largely due to our extremely strong culture, garnered from a lot of these destinations. So we have people in Australia, they're currently locked down. We're in East and West Coast, USA, and across Europe and the world. We also work with a lot of partners. So we come across with our clients cultures from all over the world, which informs how we think about things. What creates strong cultures? So many things. I need 2 slides. Slide 1, you need senior management that is stable and consistent, who are willing to spend money because it costs, but culture is worth it, and you need internal trust. You help me today and I will help you tomorrow is something I've seen that makes a difference. Building what Rohan said, hire to your values and you will get like-minded people. We have things like proactivity, ambition, one team. Organizations that are open and encourage ideas from all levels, non-hierarchical, will lead to stronger cultures. Diversity from all backgrounds will also do the same. Hotwire has had an annual boot camp running for 20 years. All global employees in one location for 3 days. Annual cost, £250,000. That's us in Barcelona in 2017. In my time here, we've been in Brussels, London, Dublin, and we've kept it virtual. It makes a difference. A bit about me. I grew up playing piano, top left. Top right, that's me singing with the City of London Choir. Bottom left, that's a CD we recorded, which bottom right went to number 4 in the charts. I've had a lot of music in my life. And the next slide leads to the inspiration for the band at Hotwire. That's the logo of Bartle Bogle Hegarty, the black sheep. On the right, that is the internal choir. BBH spent 20 years investing in all types of culture. Under the blue arrow is me singing with the internal house band, which played to all staff a couple of times per year. I worked there 5 years ago. And when I'd been to one Hotwire boot camp, before the second one, I said to my CEO, I'm going to start a band to play at boot camp. I identified global talent in secret. I called it the Borderless Thinkers, because that's the way we like our people to think about our clients. And we popped up at the evening party as a surprise in Barcelona. That's me on the stage. And that's all our shocked colleagues who could not believe that we were doing it. And I gathered people with any musical talent at all. And we just got up and we did that first gig. I think we did about 5 songs, but it was rather well received. And so having thought about something that was going to be a one-time event, I carried on. So our t-shirt, if we had one, would now say Barcelona, London. We did our own Glastonbury effectively at Milton Keynes that year. Dublin, and the last 2 years we've gone virtual. So we've still recorded 5 songs from each country over the last 2 years. That's my dancers too. I have dancers as well as musicians, Maria Paula and Jenny from Spain. We rehearse for 5 hours. We get together. In that picture, you got people from Paris, New York, London. We get 5 hours the day before to rehearse in a studio. We typically prepare a 1.5 hour gig. So it's a very intense session to get everything ready the day before, but also part of the fun. It's amazing what happens when you do these things. On the left is me rehearsing with Fee Chilcott, our global people and culture director, who said to me, I will sing. That's her on the right, on the stage in Dublin, popping up and shocking everybody that she too would sing and take part. So, you know, when you do these things, it's amazing what you find. Music crosses borders. I'm very proud to have got people from every Hotwire office around the world. In this picture, you've got New York, Spain, East and West Coast USA, Germany, France, absolutely every country. And we do pre-shows and we do post-shows. And it, you know, creates an awful lot of fun. Outcomes: employees have brought their whole selves to work. Their musical talent they might keep secret. Many have become rock stars in their home offices. 10% of Hotwire is now in my band, and nearly every woman in Hotwire is in love with these guys from France, particularly Jeremy on the left and Ivan in the middle, who produce extremely sexy performances every year. People learnings: the shyest people are often the most talented. People grow in confidence with performance, but never underestimate how much work it is to get people to do things. Culture looks easy. There's a lot of work behind the scenes I do to make stuff happen, but it's really worth it. And I think my conclusions: cultural investment is long-term, but it's worth every single penny. Find your hidden talent and set it free. It doesn't have to be music. You can run, swim, dance, knit, whatever you want, but just watch what happens when you set it free. And I think the lesson for me, which is really my last slide, is that creative ideas can take on a life of their own, and suddenly they're part of your culture. That's me singing Billy Joel at gig 1, and I'm now requested weekly for the Borderless Thinkers to do gigs. It's not mine anymore. It's a gift to the business, and it's just got its own life. So there you are. Thank you very much for listening to the story of the Borderless Thinkers.
Thank you, Adrian. Well, definitely I like your challenge, everyone, to find your hidden talent and set us free. Now we're all going to be thinking, what are we keeping hidden? Definitely. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have one more person who is going to present. Before I do, though, just to let you know, as said, put your questions in the chat. I am accumulating them, ready to present. And we have Adiba Hussein, is a communications consultant. She's next, and she's really on the ball because she just went for it, which is great. And because the faster we go, the more time we have for questions. So over to you, Adiba. Oh, Adiba, you're on mute.
Right, sorry.
No worries.
I went too fast, didn't I?
No. I like a very enthusiastic presenter.
Hi, I'm Adiba. So here goes. I've got a tough act to follow with my sort of predecessors. Right, here goes. So what is culture? I will share with you the definition I got from online Oxford Dictionary. So it's the customs and beliefs, art, way of life, and social organisation of a particular country or group. What is culture to me? So it's shared values, shared experiences and connections to a wider community. I'm of South Asian heritage. My parents were both Pakistani born. So I've got an influence from both my parents' community and surrounding community. I'm connected to two different cultures and therefore share two different values and experiences from both. Home versus, what does it mean to me? So home versus work. Being of South Asian heritage has given me the chance to experience two different cultures at home and at work. Growing up in a family with Pakistani heritage parents meant that culture at home was very different to culture in school or college and later in work. So culture as a child, adolescent, meant speaking Punjabi with my mother and father, English with my siblings, eating Pakistani food and wearing shalwar kameez, which is Asian Pakistani attire. So home. So to school, I wore uniform, ate fish and chips and spoke English. As soon as I walked through the door, my life flipped like a coin and I would greet my mother in Punjabi, get changed into my shalwar kameez and most days eat roti salan, which is chapatis and curry and rice. So home as a wife, mother, worker and volunteer is very different, not entirely different. There are influences of my Pakistani heritage in that I still like eating roti salan, but not exclusively. I don't wear shalwar kameez. These days it's a t-shirt and joggers, especially working virtually from home. So my cooking today is influenced by Italian, Middle Eastern and Far Eastern cultures. My husband and I still converse in Punjabi because he's originally from Pakistan. And now my girls have grown up in a very different sort of culture and speak both Punjabi and English. So work culture, what does work culture mean to me? Again, it's shared beliefs, values, behavioural norms, a shared understanding and expectations, including employees often reflected in an organisation's policies, visions and goals. In the world of business, it's seen as the soft stuff. So work culture, we express through our values, and behaviour. An organisation tends to have sort of unique culture and influences how we behave, and the connections to a wider community, which is the community at work. Again, work culture has very similar sort of culture as home cultures and community cultures. They have language, you have your strategic objectives, vision, you set out the ways of behaving and values. You have a company logo, you know, a symbol. You have your AGM, which is a ritual and a routine taking place every year. Organizations have structure, so they'll have a hierarchy, beliefs and values, to express their norms and behaviours culturally. Values and culture. Values and culture are not on opposing sides for me. They're both intrinsically linked and both wheels of the same vehicle of change and link back to strategy. Values are inside and behaviours are what's on the outside, so your culture. We express our values via the norms and the behaviour we're expected to sorry. Just moving very fast. My role as a communicator. So I'm a professional communicator. So my role is to communicate a conversation and share a conversation. It's to help share content, either for the purposes of changing behaviour or to reinforce behaviour. So I use language to change behaviour. I'm a storyteller. I help to create a cultural narrative for an organisation. I use language as the vehicle for sharing and reinforcing the culture and the values, and trying to embed and live and breathe those values and drive that behaviour change. So COVID was, so the case study I'm going to use is COVID. So that was all about staying safe and keeping others safe. Internally and externally, and it was and linked back to my values are all about keeping humanitarianism and looking after each other. So and giving something back. So the behaviour change there was we're asked to wear face masks and keep 2 meters apart. That's a change in behaviour that didn't exist before. So cultural change for me and others, and we all did that. And so the success is that, you know, the COVID spreading went down, and we've now been able to reduce the infection rate, and we're now successfully back out there, all engaging with each other. I like this quote about from Peter Drucker. So he says, culture eats strategy for breakfast, in that, for me, that means that if we get it right, culture is what holds organizations together socially and binds them. And if we get it right, we can sort of embed and change things.
Thank you very much, Evita. And for Adiba, sorry, I'm getting my my D's and my P's. Apologies. At least everyone knows that they didn't say what I don't make mistakes that I did. Anyways, thank you guys all for your fantastic presentations, all bringing us something a little different, and also conveying your own culture and your own experience, which is what we want to see here today. So we have some questions, and if there's any other questions that come up, if people want to just put them in the chat, I'll add them too. So I have 3 specific ones that came up in Rebecca, Evita, and Rohan's presentation. So with that, I will start off because Rebecca went first, and that's our first question. So I'll start with that, and then if any of the other panelists want to jump in and also give their educated and experiential answer to the question, please go ahead. So Rebecca, does the organism, the people, determine the culture, or the organization determines the people?
It's a really good question. And I think most organizations you ask will say that they want to determine the people and that they can do that. The reality is that while we can choose, as Rohan talked about in his presentation, as an organization, we can choose who we recruit and recruit on values and do our best to choose people who will help us continue to cultivate the culture that we want. At the end of the day, people are people. And you can only choose so much. You can only know so much about somebody in the recruitment process without dragging it on to be deeply painful for everyone involved. So I think the reality is that people, the organism creates the organization. You can do some structural things, you can do some recruitment-based things to try and get the right people into your organization, the people that you think will help grow that culture in the right way. But at the end of the day, it's all down to the organisms that are inside of it to make that happen.
Rohan, from a recruitment perspective, do you have anything to add in that piece?
You know, look, I totally agree with Rebecca. You know, I think, as I mentioned in my presentation, I think a company, you know, what creates culture is the values, then the business processes and the business practices all encompassing. And I think when you're hiring people that are as close a fit to your values means that you're hiring people that will fit in within that culture of the organization. But it doesn't mean that you're taking a view on hiring someone who has your way of living, who has your way of thinking. You know, it's as I mentioned, the business is its own entity, and you've got to try and almost run it as its own entity, and everyone fits within that. But like Rebecca said, people are people. You can't control how they think. You can't control them changing over time and their views, and so things are likely to change, and so it can have an impact on the organization. But you know, my view, I think, from a recruitment perspective is that, you know, it is very much built from the top. And I think, you know, people need to make sure that they've got their values, their business practices, their processes in control, and they're consistently evaluating those things. As I mentioned, changing landscape, that's fine. But what's very deep rooted needs to try and remain the same as much as possible.
Great. No, thank you for that. Any other comments from Adrian, Evita, or Adiba?
I just echo the values point that I did in the presentation. We deliberately do that in interviews, and I think it's really important. It shows up down the line. I just echo what Rohan said.
Great.
I just
Wow.
pick up on Hannah's point about how do you, she's asking, how do you make it, how do you make it easy for people actively encourage following these values in practice every day? I think it's the behaviour. So values are shown in how we behave at work. So that's how you would pick up and understand if people are following the values and if the values have been embedded into the employees that work for your organisation. They're living and breathing them. It's the way they behave.
Yeah,
It's measurable as well. So we do all of our performance review score against a behavior matrix, and both you and your line managers score against, and that matrix is publicly available. It's pretty clear. It's a 1 to 6 scale for every single one of our values that describes what good looks like in behaving against that value. So it's something that's really clear for all members of staff. It's also a really useful metric for us in hiring agencies as well, because we can use exactly that same template to apply to an external resource and determine whether an external resource aligns with our values as well.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes you think that because culture is subjective that you won't be able to measure it, because it's a behaviour or a change in behaviour or the way you behave, that's far easier to measure, I think.
Great. Oh, I'm glad to see some good back and forth. All right, next question. This one's for Evita. So we'll start with Evita, and if anyone else wants to chime in, it'd be great. So Evita, do you think it's important to empower people in the workplace to speak up if they see something potentially problematic? If so, how would you do this?
Yes, definitely. But it's easier said than done. And it's all down to how safe that environment is for that person to speak up. And I think that psychological safety is something that's growing. I know it's one of those words that gets thrown about quite often, but it is really important. And if you haven't read Amy Edmondson's book on psychological safety, then I highly recommend it. And and she's also got some YouTube and TED Talks out there as well, so do check them out. But if you look at Amy Edmondson, she talks about that safe environment so people can speak up and be heard and be listened to. Now, I do think we moved into a space where people are being asked for their views, with the surveys and focus groups and things and all that. And I think leaders have become more savvy with that, especially since COVID, to keep asking people how they're doing and if everything's okay and to share their views and thoughts. Where the challenge happens is when you're asking people to talk about, situations and actions and feedback, but then not actioning some of that stuff that people are saying. And that's where people fall down, and that's where organizations fall down a little bit. So asking folks to share their innermost kind of thoughts or feedback and putting them in quite, asking them to be in quite a vulnerable position to do that, and then not action or, follow through with what you're going to do with that bit of information is when that psychological safe environment starts to be, reducing and people don't feel safe enough again. And I don't mean in terms of, psychological safety is much wider than obviously creating a safe environment, like, people can speak openly and all that kind of stuff. It's much wider in the sense that it's about the way it's all down to the culture. It's how they feel. It's the behaviors, what Adiba said, that leaders demonstrate. It's the measures and the data that you have in place that Rebecca mentioned. If you're not transparent and you don't open up those doors and then you don't follow through with the feedback, then you are going to stop people from speaking up. And no matter how many times you say to people, oh, we really want to hear your views, please share your views with us, you can trust me, that's not going to kind of land with a lot of those folks. And you need to kind of demonstrate what it is, what will happen if they do and when they share that information.
So I'm going to pick on Adrian to see if he has anything else to add, because he had mentioned that he had been in 3 stellar cultures and some problematic ones. So in terms of your experience, is there anything in terms of addressing these things?
Yeah, it's interesting. The strong ones, Burson Stellar, BDH in London, all over 20, 30, 40 years, really made their people connected and invested in culture. And I think, that's why I talked about the long-term impact. I think echoing what Rebecca said, we do a 360 against your values, your own assessment of your performance and values and other people's. So we get an expectation gap between values and how you're performing, which makes a difference. But I think, Rebecca, the businesses I've seen that succeed in this make the long-term commitment and are consistent. So they don't, where businesses have a CEO changing every 12 months, who rips things up and starts something else again. So if you can be consistent, invest and hire to values, you will get a culture that sustains itself, and you begin to look at employees and see that they fit in. And I think those would be my observations of, and the one that did not work so well didn't really care about any of those things, wasn't willing to spend money on it, didn't create and foster that environment, just had very short-term profit objectives, basically.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes and one more question, but if there was any other comments on this one, because this is one that I think most of us do experience at least every so often, where you see something problematic happen. Anyone else have anything to add to Advita's great advice? Or
can I just add, Rebecca, the one thing to also think about is the biases. I mentioned it when I did my presentation, but do check in with the biases that you've got in your organization, and especially when you are doing 360 feedbacks, for example, and things like that. It's important that you are, at the moment, it depends on what organization it is, but most folks get to choose the people they want to do the kind of 360 feedback, or your leader may choose the people of 360 feedback. But it's important that you are getting a diverse representation of voices that are contributing to some of that feedback. And often when we're surrounded by the same people and the same kind of background of folk as well, we can all kind of think the same way, which doesn't really help kind of bring that wider picture in place. So do check in with your own biases and look at your team and look at the people that you're surrounded by. And if you don't feel like you've got a different backgrounds or different diverse backgrounds in there, then do look outside of that circle as well, because that will make a big difference.
Great. No, thank you for adding that. We do have to check our own biases and the biases that we're in because they're everywhere. One more question from the chat we have for Rohan. If an org has a seemingly toxic culture, can it be fixed?
Yeah, good question. So yes, I mean, ultimately the short answer is yes, it can. I think where it gets relatively complicated is it depends how deep rooted that toxicity is, I guess, and that's where you might have a large job ahead of you. I think one of the things is it could be an underlying values issue, and if it's an underlying values issue, that means revisiting, re-implementing. Rebecca mentioned that there's and Adrian mentioned there's a 360 process. There's certain things that people are judged against or scored against in order to get a promotion or in order to achieve X, Y, and Z, and that might need to be ripped up and started again. If it's a values-based issue, if it's a people's-based issue, more around certain types of behaviors, again, that does link into the values, but it might not be as deep rooted. It might just be a water cooler chat that's turning things sour in the organization, in which case those can be addressed, but they need to come from the top. And I think the first place a toxic culture is sorted out is from the management. I think if it's sorted out by people at other levels without addressing an overall way of being addressed, then I think it's a really, really, really tough thing to sort out. But I think it needs to come from the top. It depends how deep rooted it is. And yes, but overall it can be fixed either by ripping it up and starting again, or by just putting in a few different changes.
Okay. No, thank you for that. It is a complex question. So we have 2 minutes left. Does anyone else have anything to add to that question?
Just one other point as well. I think going back to the kind of analogy of how we raise plants. I don't know if any of you have ever had roses, but roses are wonderful, but also awful. They require quite a lot of maintenance, and you also have to be much more aggressive with them than you think you do. And I think sometimes when we look at how we interact with individuals who are perhaps not aligning with values, we don't take quite an aggressive enough position because we don't value the values highly enough. And that we don't necessarily identify early enough in the process that someone is not behaving in the way that is comfortable for the organization. We don't like being mean to each other, I think is probably part of it. And it's not actually about being mean. It's about helping somebody learn. And if you don't go in fast enough to help address the problem, then you've actually taken away the opportunity that person has to change their behavior. And you've gotten it to a point where it becomes disciplinary instead of corrective. So I would definitely suggest that if you feel like there might be something brewing, go in immediately and start evaluating what you might be able to do to lay out a pathway for growth for that person. Because most people don't want to be awful, and a lot of people are not even aware that they're causing a problem. And if you wait too long, then you've lost the ability to win them over.
Mm.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to, I think that's a really, really important point. I know that the All Blacks team, New Zealand rugby team, had a specific rule which they called, no, don't stab me in the back, stab me in the belly. And it was very much after a game, everyone had to outline exactly what their issues were that were on the field. And if you didn't do it directly after the game, it didn't count, you know, because then you're just talking behind people's back and you're complaining about certain things. And I think that that's exactly right. And that's what you should create, a culture of being able to give feedback instantly and, you know, taking it constructively. So yeah, and that from what I've read, that really changed the All Blacks team and the way that they operated.
No, thanks for now. That's a so I realize we only really it's the end of our time. I'd love to continue this discussion, and it's been great points shared and great advice. Before everyone leaves, though, I do have to say while I thank you all for joining us today, the Festival of Culture continues. So at 12 tomorrow, you can see another session with me, myself, and I, bringing your whole self to work with CEO of Mental Health First Aid, Simon Blake. So please join us tomorrow. And also please donate to Choose Love. Check out the link in the comments. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.